This is a Porsche Cayenne, but it's not just any Porsche Cayenne. You can pick up a Cayenne for around 75 grand. This one is more like $500,000. That's because it's a specially designed camera car with a crane created to film movies and TV commercials. And today, I'm going to review it. Before I get started, be sure to check out Cars and Bids, my enthusiast car auction website that's had some amazing recent sales, including this Dodge Challenger Hellcat, which sold for $44,000, this excellent Honda S2000, which sold for $29,000, and this Cadillac CTS-V wagon, which sold for $56,000. If you're looking to sell your cool enthusiast car from the modern era, auction it with Cars and Bids. You'll find a great audience. We have amazing selection of cool cars on Cars and Bids. I've borrowed this car from Advent Films, which is a commercial video production company based here in Los Angeles. Advent Films has shot many of the commercials that you have seen, especially car commercials for brands like Ferrari, Lamborghini, McLaren, and many others. If you're looking for a video production company for your shoot with a very professional crew, check out Advent Films using the link in the description below. And remember, they have a camera car. So let's talk Cayenne camera car. This started life as a normal Porsche Cayenne, and then it was modified to include this giant crane, which can swing all the way around. And of course, the crane has a camera mounted on the end of it. This can be used in all weather conditions, and it comes with a lot of high-tech stuff for filming, which I will show you. It really is quite impressive. And yes, it costs $500,000, or at least that's what it would cost you if you wanted to build one yourself. These things aren't cheap. They are only used by the best production companies, and today I'm going to review this one. First, I'm going to take you on a tour of the Cayenne camera car and show you all of its interesting quirks and features. Then I'm going to get it out on the road and drive it, and then I'll give it a Doug score. All right, I'm going to start the quirks and features of the Cayenne camera car with probably the biggest quirk you'll notice when you walk up to it, aside from the giant crane on the roof, and that would be the color. This car is all completely matte finished, and it's not just to look cool, that is functional. When you're filming with this car, you don't want the glare of the Cayenne's paint to be reflected in the object that you're filming, and so every surface has been wrapped in this matte finish to minimize the glare, except for the fog lights, which don't really cause that much glare and are sometimes useful, but otherwise everything completely wrapped, and it's all functional. And this matte wrapping has gone so far, you can even see the headlights have been matte wrapped up front, again to minimize glare, and same deal with the taillights in back, all completely wrapped so no glare happens. The problem though then becomes this car has no functional headlights, no taillights, no turn signals, which means that if you're going to drive it, you pretty much need a police escort to take it anywhere. Otherwise, it's not exactly a safe vehicle to operate. Now, the good news is these matte pieces on the headlights and taillights can be removed, so you can drive the car without a police escort. It is possible, but when it's in film-ready state, it has these on there, again, to minimize glare. Pretty crazy. But then your next question might be, why is this a Cayenne? If you're going to mount a giant crane on top of a car and use it for filming, and it's not going to appear on camera, why get an expensive luxury SUV? Why not get something cheap if you're going to kind of ruin it with filming equipment? And the answer is the Cayenne here is also actually functional, believe it or not. This car is used on film shoots with exotic sports cars. You need something that can be relatively quick to kind of keep up and keep pace when you're going fast around a track filming cars. But at the same time, you might need to go off-road. You're on a track filming, you want to show a car on the inside line. Well, the only thing inside of the inside line is off the track, and so you might have to take a couple of wheels off the track. You need something that is stable and comfortable and competent when you do that. And again, again, the Cayenne is helpful. It also can carry enough people, which is important. This can carry 6 people as it's been modified, and I'll show you why that's crucial in a second. But let's start talking about the crane, and specifically how it's mounted on this Cayenne. You can see it's like grafted to the roof of this car. This particular Cayenne was originally equipped with roof racks, and Advent Films told me it was important to find a Cayenne with roof racks because then the mounting points are there for you to be able to install the crane on top. So the roof racks, the factory ones, were taken out, and this was placed on instead. And you can see how it's mounted here. Now, the entire system only weighs about 500 pounds, so it's not like it's excessively heavy or putting excess strain on the roof of this car. It can totally take it, it's designed for it, and you can see it works just fine. Now, as for the crane and camera setup, this can rotate a full 360 degrees around, which is obviously very useful for filming. And check this interesting thing out. This line here is the line that brings the feed from the camera into various equipment in the car, but you can see it stops and then it restarts again down here and actually brings the feed in. So why does it stop? Why isn't it just one continuous cable going from the camera all the way to the equipment? And that's because they wanted it to be able to turn around and around as many times as possible without having to worry about whether the cable was starting to get twisted. So with the cable stopping and then starting again, the crane can spin and spin and spin, and you don't have to worry about how many times it's spun. Is the cable starting to get twisted? You don't have to think about it at all. Now, another interesting crane item, height. It can go up to 16 feet high, which is great for shooting really high shots if that's the angle you're looking for. The other cool thing is it can also go low. In fact, it can go below ground if you want. If you're like on a bridge, you can position the cable so it's like hanging off the edge and it's actually below the surface of the ground. A very cool feature with this infinitely movable crane. This whole setup was also designed to be completely waterproof, which it is. That means you can film using this car in any type of weather and you don't have to worry about stuff getting damaged or not working. You just sort of wrap the camera, the expensive camera, in a bag to make sure it doesn't get wet, and you're pretty much off and you can film in the rain or in simulated rain if that's what you need. Pretty cool. But then you might still be wondering, why the arm? Obviously this was incredibly expensive and difficult to create. Why go to all this trouble? Why not just like film out the back of the car like we always used to see Top Gear doing? You had like a camera guy in the cargo area and that was just how they filmed it. It worked perfectly. Why not do that? But there is a really good reason, and that's primarily time. The arm can get a shot on the left side of the car and then a shot on the right side of the car, and a car passing, the arm can go and see it from different angles all at once, and it makes it tremendously easy to just get shots. If you're sitting in the back of the car with a camera and you want a different angle, you have to stop the whole production, get out, come into the front of the car, reset everything, focus, all that stuff. It's just a lot more challenging, and time can be very important when you're in the car commercial shooting business, as Advent Films is, because typically when you're shooting a commercial on a public road, you have police standing at one end and the other end of where you're shooting, and they can only hold up traffic for maybe a few minutes at a time. So you have to get as much shooting done as possible until the police radio you and say, all right, we got to send traffic through, and then you're waiting for a few minutes until you can get the chance to do it again. You don't have time to set up new angles and do all sorts of different stuff, so the arm can be tremendously handy. Next up, another important piece with filming with this car is stabilizing the camera, making sure vibrations are minimized, and also it goes where you want it to and doesn't really have any issues. Now, there are electronic stabilization tools, but there's also this old-fashioned one. At the end, you can see just dumbbells from weights placed on the end to act as a counterweight for the camera. Now, you may be wondering why, with this expensive, specially designed camera car, do they just have dumbbells back there? And that's because the camera at the other end, the thing they're trying to balance, can change. You might have a heavy camera, you might have a light camera, you might need to pop off some dumbbells or add some more dumbbells as the counterweight, and so you want something simple that you can just easily change out, and that's why that's there. But there's all sorts of interesting equipment on this rig. Right above the camera where it's mounted, you can see this. This is called a vibration isolator, and what this does is it isolates vibrations. You're driving this car on a road, it's vibrating, and if the camera gets that vibration, your shot will be screwed up. You need it to be smooth, and so this device minimizes the amount of vibration that actually goes through into the camera. It has these like little rubber bandy things, and it's very interesting. A vibration isolator. That's something you probably don't use very often in your job. But next we move inside the Cayenne camera car, and when you climb in here, the first thing you notice is you're just overloaded by the sheer amount of stuff in here. There is stuff everywhere, all over, screens and headsets and devices and wires, and it's real overload. It looks like getting into a police car in here with all the stuff they have, although frankly this is even more overload. There's just a lot of stuff going on in this Cayenne. So what does it all do? I'm going to break it down. There are 6 people that can ride in this car, up to 6. Now this is only a 5-seater vehicle, but this one has 6 seats and 6 seat belts, which I will show you shortly. But I'm going to start up here with the driver. The driver is obviously very important. They have to drive the car, and they have to position the car exactly where it needs to be for whatever they're shooting. That's a crucial role, because if they're shooting a commercial with a car that's power sliding, they have to be right there next to it, getting precisely the shot they want, and it's on the driver to position the car with precision where it belongs. And one interesting thing, the people at Advent Films told me, the really good race car drivers who are fast and know all about speed, they're not necessarily the best drivers, because in this, it's all about precision. You have to be able to place the car precisely where it needs to go. Same deal with the person in the other car. If you're filming a car commercial who's driving and sliding or whatever, you have to be perfect in your blocking, like actors standing on a stage, but in this, it's cars. And being a good race car driver doesn't always translate to being a good precision, perfect spot driver, which is interesting. Now, sitting in this car, communication is key. It is essential to everything, because there are 6 people in here all doing different things. You can see various communication devices. This headset only talks to the team in the car, so you talk on that, and you can talk to the other people operating the rest of the stuff to let them know changes or what you want them to do differently. You also have a radio handset here that you can use to talk into, and you can see it's hooked up to this radio, which is then amplified using this antenna on the back of the car. This is to talk to people outside the car. So perhaps you need to talk to a client who's standing back where the filming began, or you need to talk to the police officer who's stopping the traffic and he tells you, okay, it's time to open the road back up. That's what this is for. And the driver mans both of those, not only the headset, which the whole team is wearing, but also communication with people outside. And for more communication, check this out. This little box in here broadcasts live to YouTube. So you're filming something, you can have a live stream of what you're filming going onto YouTube, which is important in the days of COVID, because it used to be that a client could ride along in the car and watch the footage as it's being shot, but now clients don't want to get in such cramped, tight quarters with the people shooting the video. So they can watch from home on YouTube and then provide instructions from there. Hey, you need to go left further or right further, or do that shot again with different light, whatever. And so this allows it to be live streamed to YouTube, so you don't actually have to sit in the car to watch the shots. That is some pretty cool technology. So you're starting to get the idea of how important communication is inside this car, but when all else fails, you can just use these Hot Wheels. There's the Cayenne camera car with the little crane arm going over it, and there's another car, maybe that's the car you're shooting in the commercial, and you can use this to help set up a shot. Now, the people at Advent Films told me they don't really need to use this all that often, especially with their own crew, because they have terminology they all understand, but for a client, it can be very helpful for explaining, okay, we're gonna do this shot next, or here's how we're gonna get this shot, or whatever. And so they do actually use those little Hot Wheels from time to time, because they can be helpful. Kind of the old school way to communicate. But anyway, moving on from the driver's seat, next up we move over to the passenger side, and you can see there is this giant box. This is essentially a remote control for the crane. The passenger in the Cayenne camera car is the crane operator, and it's the passenger who gets to place the crane where it needs to go. You press this little button in the upper right, that's sort of a kill switch that activates this remote control, and then you just use these joysticks to move it around. You can see on one side you have lift, and on the other side you have swing. So of course lift lifts it up and down, and swing moves it side to side, and that's how you do it. That's how you move the crane. It's actually pretty simple, even though this looks like complicated stuff and very valuable, very expensive, and kind of daunting. Really, you just have a nice joystick like a remote control car, which is a pretty cool touch. Now, it's worth noting the crane operator also has a monitor. You can see it on the passenger side of the dashboard right by the airbag. That monitor is hooked up, so the crane operator, of course, can see what is being shown on the camera. And actually, everyone in this car has a monitor. It's important for all the duties going on. That includes the driver, who has a monitor to the left of the steering wheel, sort of above the gauge cluster, that's also showing what's going on. The monitor is crucial for everybody's job in here, even the driver for positioning the car, so everybody has a monitor to see what's happening with the camera. And next up, we move on to the back seat in this Cayenne. You can see I obviously am sitting behind the driver. This seat doesn't have a job. Instead, it's reserved for the client. So if, for example, Advent Films is shooting a Honda commercial, then like Honda's ad agency person would sit here and watch the commercial being filmed on this monitor, and then they can give feedback. Oh no, too far to the left, too far to the right, different lighting, that sort of thing. So the person is literally sitting inside the car while the filming is taking place. That way they don't have to review footage later. Now, obviously in the days of COVID, like I mentioned, that's not happening anymore, hence the live feed being broadcast to YouTube directly from the camera car, so they can watch from somewhere else, nearby, a different location, whatever. But pre-COVID and hopefully post-COVID, you could sit here and watch the filming happen, and that made life easier. Now, the middle seat back here is actually also for the same purpose. So really, you could have two clients in here sitting in the back and providing feedback or discussing amongst themselves, oh, do we need to do this? Do we need to do that? Whatever. And then they can relay the feedback to the team instantly because they're inside the vehicle. It makes it easy. Now, the person sitting in the other back seat back here behind the passenger seat, they have a really important job. They're operating most of the camera functions from this back seat. So they're dealing with the panning, the tilting, and the rolling of the camera. And yes, you can operate all of that remotely. There are motors mounted on the camera, on the crane. And you can see the motors are turning as they're doing stuff that they're being told to do by people sitting inside the car using their remote controls. So the person sitting in this back seat is operating the panning and the tilting, and you can see that's all happening. You could watch the camera pan around and you can see it tilt, and that all is done at the direction of the person here. Now, it's done with this giant remote control joystick. You can see this one maybe looks a little bit more complicated than the one for the crane, and it has some interesting functions. Again, you use this joystick for a lot of them, and you can use it to like pan around, for instance. You move it left or right, and then the camera pans to the left or the right. Or you can use this blue dial to adjust the roll of the camera. You can see you're adjusting it, and then indeed the camera will actually roll after you adjust that dial. These little dials over on the side control the sensitivity. So if you have them all the way up, then a slight touch of the joystick will move the camera. If you have them all the way down, then you have to move the joystick a lot in order to move the camera for like close precision shots. And a good operator knows how to use all that stuff. Now, one other thing on this remote worth noting, there's a little red button in the upper left corner. That is for your zoom. So you can press that forward and it will zoom forward, or you can kind of press it backward and it will zoom backwards, and that controls the zoom of the camera. So this person here is operating most of the camera functions from the back seat while someone else is driving and someone else is operating the crane. You're starting to see why communication is so important in this car, because everybody is doing various different things and they all have to operate in sync. And finally, we move on to the cargo area where you have another seat. You can see there's one more seat back here. I told you this car seated 6, and indeed the 6th seat is back here in the cargo area. Now, to get this in here, I had to remove the spare tire to get the seat kind of down in the well so someone could sit in here comfortably. And this seat comes from like a side-by-side or an off-roader, and it even has its own seat belt so the person back here can be buckled in safely while they're riding around in the back of this Cayenne. Now, this 6th person also has a very important job, no surprise. This person deals with all of the focusing of the camera. And you can see as you adjust this yellow dial, that adjusts the focus of the camera. The more you adjust it, the more it changes where the camera is focusing on. You pretty much have to be doing this constantly, because if you're shooting, for example, a car commercial and the car is moving, it would be constantly going out of focus. So you have to always make sure the focus is exactly on what you want it to be on. And this person back here is sitting here and always adjusting the focus to make sure it's perfect. But as you can see, this seat isn't the only thing that's back here. You also have some boxes with some very large cables running to them. These are the cables for the feeds for the camera, or the ones that control the crane, whatever, and that's placed back here, so it's pretty good packaging. Now, it's worth noting that in order to get the cables back here, you have to have some place where there's a hole on the outside of the car, and that would be this window over on the driver's side. This cargo area window has been removed, and in its place, you have this plexiglass piece perfectly sized to fit where a window would have been, and then there's there's cables coming in through this window, and that's how they get to these boxes where they need to go in the cargo area. And finally, the last thing you're wondering about this Cayenne might just be, how do you transport it? What exactly do you do to move this thing around? Because it's rather tall with the crane on. Do you just drive this thing around LA with this giant crane on top sticking out the front? And the answer is, of course, no. In order to transport this, first you remove the camera, which is a tremendously expensive, delicate, fragile piece of equipment. You take that off so you don't accidentally bump into something while you're driving it along. Then you load up the Cayenne on this trailer, which is being pulled by a very heavy-duty Sprinter van with dually rear wheels to make sure it can pull this whole thing, and that's how you drive it around. So it's pretty tall, and then it's even taller because it's on the trailer, so obviously you have to be careful, but that's a lot easier than driving it around and trying not to damage the arm and always keeping track of where everything is. Now, it's worth noting that this trailer also has an extra Cayenne tire and wheel, and that wheel is matte black in order to mimic all the other wheels and tires on this car. So if you happen to have a flat tire while you're shooting, well, here's another tire that you can use so you don't have to stop production just because the car had a flat tire. You have to have backups of pretty much everything in the filming world. And so those are the quirks and features of the Porsche Cayenne camera car. Now it's time to get it out on the road and see how it drives. All right, driving the Cayenne camera car. This is surprisingly terrifying, actually, because it's very valuable and very difficult to replace. And I drive a lot of expensive and delicate cars, but I'm very scared about this one. I have the mask on because there's a couple people from the crew in the car with me to make sure that the crane and the camera aren't swung and damaged at something as I'm cruising around here. So the first thing you notice when you get in here is you're bigger than normal, but in a weird way, because the car is not all that big. But you're sticking out like many feet in front, and so you're just kind of constantly thinking about that. And you have what I'm told is $100,000 in camera equipment hanging over the front of this car. So all I'm doing is just being scared, basically. But the truth is, you do kind of get used to it after a couple of minutes, but it's still kind of scary. However, you're comforted in the knowledge that there's other people here monitoring the crane and the camera, and at this point, if we run into something, it's probably on them. So I don't have to worry about it as much, because the camera's just sticking out there over. Now, the interesting thing about driving this vehicle is you have to be very precise with exactly where you want to do it. So whoever's driving has to know, okay, this is how big the camera is, this is how big the crane is, this is exactly where we are, this is where we're going. And you can see why communication becomes such a challenge in this vehicle, because you have one person running the crane and one person running the camera and one person driving the car and blah, blah, blah. You're basically trying to do all these things that, you know, you'd like to just do with one individual, but with 4, and so you really need everybody to be on the same page, and that's why the headsets are important, and that's why communication is important in this thing. The people who are in the car, they're pros at this, obviously. They know what they're doing from Advent Films, and so it's unbelievable how quickly they're able to move everything around. If I were doing it, I probably would have hit it on a parked car by now, but it's amazing. And it's also interesting to think about, okay, if you're sitting in here driving this thing with the camera, trying to shoot a commercial or whatever, a movie, and you're trying to hit the right spots while all these things are going on and you're getting talked to in this, it takes an enormous amount of concentration. And I don't know that I'd be able to do it. I'm already kind of overly concentrated trying to make sure I don't run into anything because I have all this expensive gear around, and I think it would be even more insane, you know, obviously if you were trying to actually shoot something and you're trying to hit an exact spot and there's another car that's providing another variable. Now the interesting thing is when they drive this, they're on a racetrack trying to film something going pretty fast, and so they're like foot to the floor. I mean, I'm like feathering it because I'm afraid of all this equipment. You know, when you drive this thing, I'm still thinking that camera's gonna fall off and it's gonna be unbelievably expensive. It's not actually gonna happen, but it's my fear. Now you also have, the other interesting thing is, depending on the shot you're doing, you have the camera arm basically directly in front of you. And so you have to kind of think like, you know, your field of vision is blocked a little bit by this thing, but that's just sort of a reality of having the arm and having the crane, and you just have to make that work. And I can imagine it's unbelievably difficult to try to get the car within an inch or a foot. I mean, they were telling me they'll have clients say, okay, we're a few inches off, a couple of inches off, got to do it again. I mean, you're talking about unbelievably tiny things, and trying to do this with the camera and the arm is just crazy, and with other people in the car who are all responsible for their own parts of it. Otherwise, aside from that, this just is a regular Cayenne. It drives relatively normally like a Cayenne, but you just have so much equipment and so much thought going on. And I mean, you wouldn't want to drive this thing around on a normal basis unless you were shooting with it. There's so much stuff, there's so much valuable equipment, and frankly, there's a lot of stress to it. It's larger than, the regular car with the crane hanging off, and it's just a lot. There's a lot going on. But I could see, I mean, obviously it's an incredibly useful tool if this is your job. It brings this to a whole new level, and you're able to really get in tight and focus and follow cars. And this is how the commercials are made that you see with cars on a racetrack or cars in a canyon road or whatever. This is how it's done. With a vehicle like this. And so that's the Cayenne camera car. This is just a regular old Porsche Cayenne with a twist, a very, very expensive twist. This is incredibly cool, and I have always wanted to check out one of these camera cars. Ever since I saw pictures of them, I wondered what exactly it was all about. And now finally I did, thanks to Advent Films. Hope you've enjoyed this, and now it's time to give this Cayenne a Doug's score. Starting with the weekend categories and styling, the Cayenne is a nice, attractive SUV, but with this giant arm on top, it loses some of that handsomeness, and it gets a mere 3 out of 10. Acceleration does 0 to 60 in the low 7-second range, and it gets a 1 out of 10. Handling is sharp enough for an SUV like this, and it gets a 5 out of 10. Fun factor is relatively low for a Porsche, largely because it's also combined with the sheer terror of driving a vehicle with so much value mounted on top of it. I'll give it a 4 out of 10. Cool factor, however, is huge. Advent Films tells me that this thing gets insane looks and questions and photos taken wherever they go, and it gets an 8 out of 10 for a total weekend score of 21 out of 50. Next up are the daily categories and features. It's reasonably well equipped as a car, but then it also has tons more equipment as a camera car. Although this equipment is highly specialized, of course, you may not need it, so it gets a 7 out of 10. Comfort is a little less than normal for a car like this. It can be a bit cramped in here, especially if you're the person stuck in the cargo area, and it gets a 6 out of 10. Quality is high, both the car and all the rig stuff. This is tremendously well executed, and it gets a 7 out of 10. Practicality is low since it's terrifying to drive with the expensive camera equipment, and it doesn't have headlights, and it's very tall, and it gets a 2 out of 10. Value, however, is high. This is incredibly expensive to build, but it provides a huge benefit to filmmakers, so it's worth it, and it gets a 7 out of 10 for a total daily score of 29 out of 50. Added up, and the Doug score is 50 out of 100, which places it here against, well, other weird cars I've reviewed. I have no idea what to score the Cayenne camera car against, but it makes an admirable showing in the history of my weird car reviews. More than anything, though, I'm thrilled I had a chance to check out such an unusual vehicle.